Hello and welcome everyone. I think everyone's settled in. We're going to get started. I'm Javier Ramirez, and along with Kristen Gilbert, run Exile and Bookville here in downtown Chicago. We want to welcome you to Caoilinn the Conversation, where Caoilinn Hughes seeks out the finest writers from the UK and Ireland and has a chat with them about their latest work. We, of course, cannot thank Caoilinn enough for all of the incredible folks she has brought to us over the last year or so, and today she continues that trend. Caoilinn will be in conversation with Julia Armfield, whose new novel, Our Wives Under the Sea, has been creating a ton of buzz all year and came out here in the States just last week. I have to take a deep breath for this. Julia has a master's in Victorian art and literature from Royal Holloway University. Her work has been published in Granta, Lighthouse, Analog Magazine, Neon Magazine, and Best British Short Stories 2019 and 2021. She won the White Review Short Story Prize in 2018, longlisted for the Deborah Rogers Prize in 2018, and shortlisted for the Sunday Times Young Writer of the Year Award. Salt Slow, her 2019 short story collection, was longlisted for both the Polari and Edge Hill Prize in 2020, and shortlisted for the London Magazine Prize for debut fiction as well. She also won a Pushcart Prize in 2020 for her story Longshore Drift. Julia works and lives in London. Julia, I have to say, you have already accomplished more than most gifted writers achieve in a lifetime. So kudos to you. We're very honored to have you on the show and look forward to what looks like a promising publishing career. So congratulations. Of course, Julia will be in conversation with Caoilinn Hughes, whose latest novel, The Wild Laughter, won, can you see that? No, there we go. Won the 2021 Royal Society of Literature's Encore Award and is a perennial Exile favorite. Her first novel, Orchid and the Wasp, won the Collier-Bristow Prize and was a finalist for 4 of the prizes. Her short fiction won the Moth Short Story Prize, the Irish Book Award Story of the Year, and a No Henry Prize. Before we get started, I would ask that those of you tuning in this afternoon, please mute yourselves, but keep your cameras on so that our guests don't feel like they're speaking into a void. Type any questions you might have into the chat, and Caoilinn will ask them of Julia around the 45-minute mark. You can purchase copies of Our Wives Under the Sea and Wild Laughter through the link in the chat, or go to exileandbookville.com. We ship throughout the US, and all of the copies will come with signed book plates. We're going to get started. Please help me in welcoming Julia Armfield and Caoilinn Hughes. Enjoy the show, everyone, and thank you too for being here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Javier. Thank you, Exile in Bookville, and Kristen behind the scenes as well. It's the summer, so it just feels like an incredible fact of there being good people in the world who are willing to host book events in such times of languor. So it's lovely to be here with Julia. I came across Julia's writing first as a short story writer. Possibly we'll find out whether that's the case for most people. It was a short story of hers that won the White Review Short Story Prize. And I think it's often a lot of US readers we have here, there's a really strong culture of short story magazines in the US. There aren't so many in the UK, and the White Review, I think, is up there with Granta as being, just incredibly well thought of. The stories that you find in that magazine in particular tend to be kind of very distinctive in terms of voice, in terms of innovation, usually very formally interesting, kind of unapologetic in that sense, and maybe even stories that are in the White Review wouldn't be published in something like Granta. So it's very much like just a life raft for innovative fiction, and with a lot of linguistic verve, and so I always, as soon as the shortlist comes out for that prize, I always read the whole shortlist. And I say now as someone never published there, so it's not a self-compliment here. It's just a massive kudos to Julia, and you can all go and read her short story. And the other one that Javier mentioned, Longshore Drift, I think is in Granta online. So that's how I came across your writing, Julia. So maybe it makes sense to ask about how it started for you. Did your writing start with short stories, or were there other manuscript or book length works written before your first book, Salt Slow?
It was, I think to an extent, what happened for me was that short stories were something I took up in a strop because I couldn't finish a novel. Because I sort of always wanted to write novels in the way that I think quite a lot of people who end up writing them have always done. But I could never seem to get to the end of them. I was constantly getting bored of them or getting bored of the characters or wanting to do something else. And so I think I started writing short stories in maybe like 2016, 2017, really is just a way to give myself a break and also see if I could do it. And also kind of the serotonin rush of actually finishing a short story is something that you don't get with a novel so often because it takes you so much longer to write a novel. Whereas with a short story, when you're done, you can show it to somebody and you can send it out and you immediately get kind of, it's a different experience. And so basically what happened for me is that I wrote a couple of short stories and more or less immediately started sending them places. I sent them to journals, I sent them to competitions, I sent them places. And I think I just had a real series of pieces of good luck because I sent my story, The Great Awake, to the White Review 2018 competition. And I also, at about that point, I had, I think, 4 or 5 stories, which I sent to the Deborah Rogers Prize, which is a really wonderful prize in the UK for, I think it's about 20,000 words of an unpublished manuscript from a debut. And I got longlisted for that. And I got my agent out of that. And so then it turned out that I basically had enough for us to put a short story collection together and for that to go on submission. And just before it went on submission, I won the Right Review, which made it easier. And so it was sort of, I think sometimes people, you have to practice and you have to write and you have to be good to an extent, but I think so much of writing is luck. And that was really kind of what that was for me at the beginning. And then I had to really get myself back into writing a novel after that.
And had you tried writing a novel before the stories?
Yeah, I had. I tried unsuccessfully to write novels before the stories. But then because we were selling a short story collection, and I don't necessarily know if this is the same in the US actually, but in the UK, I definitely think that if you are selling a short story collection, there is an undertow of, that's cute, but can you give us a novel as well? And so I essentially had to sell the short story collection along with a pitch for a novel. Which I then didn't end up writing. I ended up writing an entirely different novel, but it was, I had to write a novel essentially out of necessity.
Okay, wow, okay. Did you do an MFA program or?
No, I did, I studied English at university and then I did Victorian Art and Literature MA. I did when I was 21, I did 6 months of, it was a sort of once every fortnight or something course with Curtis Brown, which is an agency in the UK. Which was very valuable, although obviously I was 21, I wasn't really writing in the same way that I am now. But yeah, that's what I did.
Okay. So to my eye, your books are very different. And I wonder, influence will come up. So I always kind of like, as a writer in an interview, I'm always so scared about this because there's just no way to communicate it. It's just, I usually just go blank. But I wonder whether the influences for the 2 books were quite different because, or maybe whether you were drawn to writing from distinct writers depending on the genre. So because in your short fiction, say if I were Javier, I were a bookseller and I were hand selling Salt Slow, I think I'd probably bring up writers like Kelly Link, Carmen Maria Machado, Samantha Schweblin, Angela Carter, and I've seen Angela's name come up in lots of reviews, but I wouldn't bring her up for the novel. Maybe a newer writer called Kimberly King Parsons. If you haven't read her, I think you'll really like her work. Karen Russell is someone else who I thought of when I was reading when I was reading Salt Slow. Amelia Gray, even maybe like kind of getting closer to the novel now. Sarah Hall, Amy Bender. And maybe even someone like Clarice Lispector, and then for the novel, then there are like books like The Department of Speculation by Jenny Offel that kind of feel like in similar contemplative, slow, linguistically dense and rich, fraught atmosphere type of thing. And I wonder, whether or not you feel that you've been, just by virtue of kind of getting older as a writer, your influences have been changing, or whether you do feel that there's actually a different kind of network of influences on the 2 books.
I think that's so interesting that you say that, actually, because I don't necessarily get that often. I think that it's so interesting to me that you sort of approach it in terms of tone and language, which I think is also kind of very true of the way that you write as well, which I find so interesting. That it's sort of like, it's not. I think a lot of people are like, Our Wives is a very natural progression from Salt Slow because of the subject matter, because I think that both of them are so sort of a juxtaposition of sort of very daily realism and genre, which is the thing that I'm doing in both books. But I think that there's so much to do with moving from short stories to novels, which just requires different technique and requires different use of language, I think, because you're not, I don't mean to say showing off so much in a novel, but you don't, the pressure is different in a novel because you don't have to sort of show every single thing you can do in a short space of time. And so I think that it wasn't so much that I was inspired by different writers as that I was inspired quite a lot by the same writers, but I was just taking different lessons from them, I think. Because Sarah Hall is one absolutely that I always read when I'm trying to get myself going. I don't know whether you have this, but sometimes I just have to return to, there's a wonderful story, which isn't even particularly my genre, but there's a story by Sarah Hall called Luxury Hour, which is just about a woman swimming, but it's also kind of a take on Jane Eyre, and I just think it's fascinating. And I think just the cleanness of her language is so wonderful, and the fact that nothing is ever out of place, and she's never pushing a metaphor beyond its kind of its necessary point, I find so interesting. But apart from that, I mean, I think quite a lot of what I work from is actually, I'm more inspired by movies, I think, and especially with Our Wives, I was taking a lot of inspiration from things that I have watched my whole entire life. I'm very inspired by sort of both Suspiria movies. I'm very inspired by movies that kind of deal with the body and the fear of the body and that kind of thing. And so I think that in both cases, from the books and the movies that I was inspired by, it's kind of the same for both books, but I was just taking very different lessons from them.
Okay, yeah, that's really interesting. That's so nice for those writers, if they knew that you were able to kind of that you were inspired to write such different works from their works. I mean, I think that would be a gift for them to know. But just so there's so much, even from what you said, I want to ask you about film and genre and things like that, but just for the audience to help kind of situate them into this book, Our Wives Under the Sea, I'll attempt to describe its plot, because like in this series of interviews, I mostly just do the things that I found so torturous to have to do myself.
I hate describing the plot of the book. I love you for doing this. Thank you.
So this is the kind of situation, let's say, that the book presents up front, and then we can talk about themes and things like that after. So and I might actually ask you after this if you would be up for reading a section. That'd be lovely, because then we can hear it as well. So the novel follows Miri, who's a grant writer, and her marine biologist wife, Leah, who is chosen for a 3-week deep sea research trip in a submarine. And the expedition is run by a kind of nebulous corporation called the Center, which is kind of, at some point in the novel, we glance at the person running it, who seems to be a kind of techno optimist, possibly libertarian. And so the mission falters, and Leah is trapped with her crewmates for 6 months, 6 miles beneath the ocean's surface, presumed dead, also presumed by her wife to be dead, and unable to communicate with the outside world. When Leah does finally return, she's changed, as anyone would be, but maybe more so. And she and her wife, the kind of present tense of the novel is she and her wife are attempting to resume their relationship, or at least Miri is attempting to resume the relationship. So it's a kind of, in the domestic realm, that central story. And so there's 2 points of view. Miri's in the present tense and Leah's in the past. So there's so much to kind of complement the novel on, but it's so not annoying, the structure, which you always expect when you're going to have these, and it'll feel like overly structured, but it's incredibly fluid, which is, it feels very much organically tied to the whole psychic realm of the book and the structure. So I'm sure it wasn't, it can't have been written that way. It can't have just come out that way. But Yeah, if you want to disown anything that I've said, Julia.
No, that's perfect.
Okay.
That's lovely. Thank you so much for saying it's not annoying. That's really the only takeaway I wanted.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah, so it'd be lovely to hear a reading if you would oblige.
Yeah, no, of course. I was thinking, so the novel is told between two voices. It's not really a conversation, but it pings back and forth between Miri and Leah. And the Leah section is largely told from the point when she was under the sea, whereas the Miri section is when she has come back. So I'm just going to read a little bit from the Leah section. It won't be too long, I promise. Sea floor, full dark. About half an hour after the craft came to its miraculously gentle stop, Matteo started vainly trying to send distress signals again. Though as Yalka pointed out, there was little to no sense in doing this, since we were on board the only vessel capable of diving to such a depth. What are they going to do? She said, her impulse to pray apparently cut short by irritation. Send a search party 10,000 feet, then throw a rope ladder the rest of the way? I remember her then, glaring at us, as thin as I have ever known a person to be and still be able to move around. None of us commented on the strangeness of the situation, on the way a routine research dive had so quickly turned into this. As before, during the fall, the impulse to question felt curiously flattened, the notion of how this had happened somehow beside the point. I smelled burning flesh again, just for a moment, and thought about saying something, then distracted myself with thoughts of things I had left above sea level, of polystyrene cups and orange juice and pizza, with the sound of our neighbour's television and the way Miri bit at the skin of her lip so often that kissing tasted bloody, metallic zip of a licked battery. Sunken thoughts, I imagined her saying, and turned my face towards the windows. Without lights, the water was blind around us, and holding torches to the glass resulted in little but our own faces reflected back, ghost forms in deep water, 6 eyes peering in from without. There are 5 main layers to the ocean, at least if you go by scientific designation. The first is the epipelagic or sunlight zone, also known as the photic zone, which covers the distance beneath the surface and approximately 600 feet beneath. Here, there is only minimal pressure, coral reefs, color, and pleasure divers, the option to hold your breath and jump. After that comes the mesopelagic or twilight zone, reaching an approximate 3,000 feet, at which point sunlight may still penetrate, though beyond this drop comes the bathypelagic or midnight zone, and from here on, you're down in the dark. At around 13,000 feet and below, you pass through the abyssopelagic or abyssal zone, an area whose name roughly translates to no bottom. No light here, of course, and temperatures a little above freezing, though you will still encounter life of a fashion of this depth. Things come down this far and further, though they seldom come with blood and bones included. Once you reach depths of 13,000 feet, everything has a strange name, but rarely a backbone. Vampire squid and zombie worms, cosmic jellyfish, tripod fish, and faceless cusps and pelican eels. Creatures that live this deep are frequently solitary and only infrequently seen. There are big things down here, old things, and certainly more of them than we know about. Almost every piloted dive to these depths has uncovered something new. Beyond this point, there is a final layer, though the furthest depths of the sea are fragmented and interspersed amongst trenches formed by tectonic subduction, where the plates of the earth converge and the older, denser plate is pushed down beneath the lighter, creating fissures and places for things to drop deep. This layer is known as the hadal-pelagic or hadal zone, a name which speaks for itself. Lying between roughly 19 and 36,000 feet, much of this layer of the water is unexplored, which is not to say uninhabited. It was difficult to tell exactly how far we had fallen without the system online to give us a read. It would, I suppose, have been entirely possible to hit the seabed without falling into one of the trenches. Although looking out onto the blackness, I believed almost without question that we had fallen farther than it was possible to go. It was difficult to imagine anywhere deeper than the place we had ended up.
Gorgeous. I got sucked right in again. There is a different rhythm. This isn't a question, but there is a different rhythm to the two narratives. One feels more ordered, even though it's portraying a scenario, so disordered and so strange. And the effect of that is weirdly, maybe even alienating to a reader in a way where we can kind of get into Miri's perspective there. We can kind of empathize with that. How can somebody manage such a strange scenario? So with such kind of logic, yeah, or such a cerebral way of dealing with it. One of the things I'll bring up front, because I've read you write such interesting things about this. You wrote an essay for LitHub called "The Ocean is a Lesbian: Notes on Queer Women and Water," and you wrote that Our Wives Under the Sea is a novel about the water, or rather the fact of returning from it. And of course, the novel is the answer to this question. So, but I'd love to hear you speak about that for those here who might not have read the essay, the water in the tradition of lesbian narratives in that kind of cultural context, and maybe too about what it is to return from it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it was, I wasn't doing it on purpose in the way that we don't really realize that we're ever doing it on purpose, but we're actually, I think we're always reacting to things as writers. You're always reacting to something that you've seen or something that you've read or something in the atmosphere. And I became very aware as I was writing this novel that there is just a huge tradition in lesbian media of preoccupations with the water, with the sea, with swimming. In my essay, I talk a lot about the French director Céline Sciamma, who has made a series of kind of movies about queer women, which are often kind of, one is set in a swimming pool about a synchronized swimming team, and one is a portrait of a lady on fire, which a lot of people have seen, is set by the sea. And I kind of started looking around and finding that this was sort of everywhere. And I think there's a lot of reasons for this, and I think that a lot of it is to do with changeability and the fact of the water being one thing and another. There is an image in Our Wives Under the Sea when Miri and Leah, there's a flashback to when they went to the sea and they saw something called a sea lung, which is kind of a sort of semi-mythical geographical kind of phenomenon whereby, and it actually comes from an image in an Annie Proulx novel, The Shipping News, which I absolutely love. But it's this thing that ancient mariners would call a sea lung, when the water, which is thrown to the surface of the sea, freezes so quickly that it kind of becomes solid. And so it's sort of this idea of this solid surface on the ocean, but everything being liquid beneath. And it spoke to something I really feel about queer identity, the idea of being one thing and another, the idea of being one thing on the surface and being something underneath, the idea of being something to different people, being something to your parents, being something to your partner, being something at work, and being something to society. And I think that it was something that I was very sensible of, particularly when I was writing Miri, because I think Miri is a character who has difficulty with identity, has difficulty with her mother, and it wasn't that I was necessarily using the image intentionally, but it became so natural as an image, and something that I felt that I really had to write about, and just such a natural setting. And there's so much about it as well, the idea of the ocean as danger but also as freedom. There are so many like seminal queer texts, if you think about like Sarah Waters' novels, which are often, it's not really about the ocean, but they're often set by the sea, and it's always the idea of this thing right here, which looks dangerous but could actually kind of be your salvation. And I'm just really interested in that.
Yeah. And so someone is always on their own in the ocean in a way as well. So there isn't any, I once did this course in music. Well, it wasn't a course, it came from a kayaking club in a university, but I wasn't even in university, so such a weirdo going to one of these. But they were older. There were people but it was a weekend called Women on White Water, and there was just you can't, I mean, the memories of that outweigh any other kind of memories, because it was the only time I ever felt on water of being part of a community, because normally you think of water as being just this, maybe that's where the balance of fear and freedom comes as well, you know, that you have to come to terms with whatever you're able to bring into that. Yeah.
Oh, I think that's so interesting. It was also one time I was doing an interview and somebody asked me really quite a fantastic question. She said, do you feel that you are reclaiming the very traditionally masculine ocean? Which I'd never really thought of as a thing. And then I thought about it afterwards, and I was like, oh, I understand, because on the one hand, you're talking about the long history of, you know, the naval history or whatever and everything, and that being so very male. And I thought about that and I thought, oh, that's really cool. But on the other hand, I went back further and I was like, yes, but every traditional mythical sea monster is a woman, more or less, without fail. So I just sort of, it was an interesting balance to think about.
Yeah, and sirens and mermaids and all that, you know, they're often very feminized. Yeah,
and Scylla and Charybdis and all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. There's something also about the proximity, I think, of the body and nature in this book, that maybe that the sea is kind of the quickest access to that, or the most immersive aspect to that. Yeah, I don't know whether you were thinking about that as a theme in this book, because more so than the stories in Salt Slow, it felt kind of a very existential kind of relationship.
I know what you mean. I think I was thinking a lot about ourselves and the body as porous, in a sense, not just in the sense of, you know, your skin is porous, but just the sense of oneself never being entirely contained. You are affected by nature, you take nature into you. And obviously, not to spoil anything that happens in the novel, but I think that I am ambivalent at best about whether what happens to one of the characters is a good thing or a bad thing, because it is so caused by nature and so connected to nature. And I think that was something I was thinking about a lot when I was writing it.
But that's very, very well balanced in the book. Yeah, I can't say anything about it without spoiling it. But yeah, I mean, on the second read, I really noticed how carefully that was managed. Really, one sentence could have kicked it over into you know, making it something more specific and something then with less potential. And so the other thing, I suppose, is then that this is the water allows for these moments of incredible intimacy, and I think the book is somehow interested in ways of portraying intimacy, despite the fact that it's in a lot of ways a book about distances and unreachability. And so I wonder maybe if the trope then kind of allows you to get to that kind of point sooner. There are some, you know, gorgeously sexy, intimate moments in the book, but a lot of them are in the past tense. And so then that's also this unreachable kind of arena as well. And so I suppose it also means something different for Leah and Miri. Were you thinking about that?
I was thinking about something that this is sort of a sideways swipe at your question, I guess, but like something I'm always thinking about and something I always want to do is, like I've said already, the sort of the bashing up of realism and genre and the way the two things interact and they can interconnect, because I find it so much easier to write about dailiness and normality and intimacy and relationships when something else is going on. I think because it allows me to augment everything kind of through the prism of something terrible has gone on under the sea, but also our days go on and also our relationship goes on, or it doesn't, because I think that's what happens most of the time. I think that people don't go on being horrified by a terrible thing. People make an accommodation and their lives still kind of supersede that thing, or their lives try to kind of jump over that thing even when it's kind of been drastically changed. So I was thinking about that a lot when I was writing the book, because this terrible thing has happened to Leah, and over the course of the book you come to realize more of what is going on, but also at the same time to realize, I think, how little you actually know. But the relationship is still the key thing, and the fact of trying to scrabble the relationship back from that, I think, was so important.
That's that kind of strangeness. I did want to ask you about that, because it's something, you know, that I think most people think about every day, and to a degree, the strangeness that is, you know, serendipity, the strangeness of illness, of, you know, apathy about the climate disaster, about politics, and, you know, not even knowing if a think piece is satirical or not. That and those kind of strangenesses that get leveled into the new normal, the now normal, and so one day to the next, you know, the strangeness isn't, you know, it is stranger than before, but somehow, and it's a greater percentage. And I think that's where this genre stuff is so effective at blurring that line. where it can become such a large percentage of our lives that it's bizarre that we're not kind of all imploding.
Yes.
And yeah, so is that something that you were thinking about in this book?
That's the key thing that I'm thinking about all the time. I'm so fascinated by just the tedious bureaucracy of the fascinating. I'm so interested in somebody who was saying yesterday, like, you know, it was 40 degrees in London for 2 days, which I guess, I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit. It's like 104 or something. It's hot. And everybody was sort of getting messages from their offices being like, well, if you can come in, that would be nice. And somebody was just like, if it was literally the end of the world, you would be getting a message from your office being like, if you could come in, that would be great. And I'm so interested in that. I'm interested in the way that you always think in movies that the terrible thing or the outlandish thing is going to grind everything to a halt, and it doesn't, because capitalism will preside over things and dailiness will preside over those things. And that is kind of in my short story, The Great Awake, which was in my collection, Salt Slow. It's kind of about that, or something I was trying to perfect at that point, which is about something absolutely bizarre has happened, but everyone just still has to go get coffee and stuff. And I think it's kind of what's going on in our lives as well, is that you still have to pay your taxes, you still have to try and get through to somebody on the phone, even though all you're doing is getting an automated voice. And I think it's the thing I'm preoccupied with, it's the thing I'm writing again now. It just keeps happening.
Yeah, that makes sense. And yeah, personally, I find that it's the reason why I keep writing about very much the present tense. And because it feels like I just, it feels so strange not to. It feels like an escape from that cognitive dissonance. That's just personal. Everybody else will have their own reasons for writing in different periods, but so there's some moments in this novel that really explode that so well, like the satire of online culture, where there's even this kind of performative or manufactured trauma. I'll not remember the name of the group that she joined, something to do with wives of men who've gone to space.
I don't think it has a name, actually. I think it's just there's a message board for that Miri at one point finds, where these women are basically role playing that their husbands have gone to space and they haven't come back, and that's the thing that they enjoy to role play. But I can't remember my own book now, but I don't think it has.
They're releasing one another about appropriate amounts of grievance for their particular lost fictional husband. Yeah, it's absolutely hilarious. Very kind of David Eggers, The Circle terrain. But there's also something in that about, or at least I read into it, that there's something about stories as a means of survival. Because there has to be some incredible desperation with people in that situation, needing to narrativize something to explain how they're feeling, or
or even people who people who potentially are not feeling the grief that they have invented, but are feeling a much wider form of existential grief and have to channel it somewhere that is, I guess, in some way acceptable, or that has a structure around it. Because I think that grief is so absolutely, what's the word I'm looking for, it throws you out into the ether, and it's completely alienating, even when you have people around you. I think there's a bit at the end of the novel where Miri is talking to another character who has essentially also gone through something similar to what she is going through, who says something along the lines of, you kind of look off after 2 months and everyone has been supporting you and everybody is grieving with you, but everybody has got up and moved on after 2 months and you are there by yourselves. And it's not that they don't care, it's just that their real lives have to reassert themselves, whereas you are now in this place by yourself. And I think that people have to find stories and habits and routines and things just to kind of move them through that kind of emotion.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it's also something I was really interested in writing about as well, and so I loved to see, at least I read into it, that it's so much about the anticipation of grief. This book, and that's a lot of what The While After is about. Because we spend a lot of our, especially if you have someone very ill very close to you when you're young, you spend a lot of time, even if they recover, preparing to and it's so bizarre that there aren't more stories, I think, about that.
about that strange middle area, the fact that you have to make your peace with the fact that fundamentally grief is kind of selfish. Fundamentally, you are not necessarily grieving for the person, you're grieving for yourself without the person, you're grieving for the thought of yourself without the person. And the way that you constantly have to, when you are anticipating grief, the way that you're constantly making an accommodation every single day, and the life that you're living is perhaps not real life because it's stolen in a way. And I think that's key in our lives quite a lot, because it's not only about Miri and Leah, but it's also about what happened to Miri's mother, who died of quite a long illness. And I think a lot of the book is about not necessarily having grieved badly, but perhaps not having grieved well and wanting to do it better a second time around as well. So I was thinking about a lot of that for sure.
Oh wow, that's interesting. And I suppose the grief of possibly what could be, no spoilers, hypothetically the end of a relationship, or certainly a relationship changing. Yeah, I mean, there's so many things to say, and I'm conscious of the time. If people have questions, now is a really good time to type them in so that I can feel pressured into reading them out, rather than I am torn between what I want to ask you. But just one thing to say, in appreciation, that this, I'm pretty sure, so it's Miri's father who teaches her to swim, am I right?
Leah's father teaches her.
Leah's father. And is it Leah's mother who then gives her this shampoo for getting chlorine out of your hair?
Yeah.
I found that detail so devastating. And I don't know if that's what that was meant, but like, oh yeah, brutal. Just in terms of kind of lack of acknowledgement of, what somebody wants to do and where their curiosities go. Anyway, just an appreciation moment. There's so much very, very subtle critique of kind of parenting in the book. One thing I should mention is the structure. So you mentioned in your reading there, the excerpt, that there are these distinct stages, as there are in the novel. The story is kind of laid out in these different sections corresponding to each ocean layer. So the sunlight zone, the twilight zone, the midnight zone, the abyssal zone, and the hadal zone. And I wonder whether this is way too cheesy a reading, but if it had to do with the stages of grief as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think it was one of those things that I don't have aha moments very often. I think a lot of writing to me is hack work, and always has been. But I was reading kind of around and about things about the ocean, and it presented itself to me, the 5 layers of the ocean. It just presented itself to me as this beautiful scaffolding to hang everything on, because I think because it's already 2 different voices, the voices are very much, one is going down and one is coming up. And so it was kind of nice to have the stages going down, so that the voices, one could kind of struggle against that and one could follow it. And I think that
I didn't even notice that, but that's gorgeous. Yeah.
And I think that you can definitely also, like, I can't remember what the stages of grief are. I think it's like bargaining, anger, something. And it's not really intentional. It's not something I was sort of hammering into the novel, but you're definitely following Miri reacting to things in a way that goes down. In that way, so I think it definitely works as a reading.
Yeah, no, it's it's subtle as well. Even though it sounds very rigid and structured, like I said, it doesn't read that way. So one thing that kind of if people are looking at reviews of your work, usually some genre is mentioned. It might be one or the other. Horror comes up frequently, magic realism every so often, gothic almost always. And it seems maybe sci-fi, kind of speculative. And I know you have a master's in Victorian art and literature. And so I'm wondering if you're intellectually interested in genre, if maybe you always have been, and do you think that this book, or maybe everything that you write, will be infused with Victorian Gothic because because of that kind of education interest, and maybe you're writing into this kind of palimpsest of Victorian Gothic literature?
Well, that's so interesting. I think I've always just been compelled by genre in all forms. I love horror, and because I am so interested in cinema, I think that the genres get blended in a very different way to the ways that they do in literature. And I think that genre snobbery gets us nowhere. I think that genre is by and large a marketing tool, I think, to me as well. I think that like books should be what they are. And I guess that like in terms of the Victorian, I don't pull an enormous amount from a lot of the things I studied. I'm very interested in H.G. Wells. I'm very interested in kind of literature of that period, but it's not necessarily really what I was studying. I was doing a lot of Dickens. I was doing a lot of pre-Raphaelite stuff. But I think that one thing is that really kind of stuck with me was more, I ended up doing my master's thesis on hair, teeth and nails in the Victorian imagination, which definitely, it allowed me to plumb into the weirdly genre adjacent things that kind of take place in really not genre at all novels of the Victorian period. There's a lot of just kind of like horror adjacent images of teeth falling out and of hair being shorn off and of fingernails being pulled out and things, and it's there a lot. And so that, I think, has definitely led to my interest in finding genre in otherwise not genre things, if that makes sense, and putting that into my own work. So I think that's definitely informed it.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I mean, we could go down the teeth, and certainly skin and all of that. You know, which is also a great way of writing about anxiety. And you know, it's quite hard to write contemporary characters, more than one, that doesn't, you know, suffer from a bit of that.
No, very.
So I see a couple of questions. Okay, just before I read out a question, I did want to ask you. So you mentioned this cinema thing, and I'll be honest. The only other writer that I've heard say they're more influenced by film than by, well, it was in fact theatre, is Martin McDonagh, and I have a big bone to pick with that, because you know, he kind of had this like huge breakthrough as an Irish writer. I think Summers in Ireland, whatever. So, but I have less of a bone to pick with you about it. I'm more interested in them. So it's because it's not, it doesn't make a lot of sense that you know would be inspired by the visual language of cinema, and then go into the linguistic form, and by the way, you know, excel at sentences and the language. I'm a complete language snob. I really can't read books that are very plain spoken. I'm too slow a reader. I really need to get some kind of richness on the page. And there was a review in The Guardian by Ada Merriam that says Armfield has a poet's ability to make a phrase both new and inevitable. So how do you justify or explain or that pull, you know, the visual, and obviously that was the degree was also in art and literature, so there's a visual kind of thing there, but then the movement toward language, and language that is interested in language, or at least it seems to be.
I think it's kind of what you mentioned at the beginning, actually, in that because obviously I am so interested in film, but which is not to say that I don't read. I can read, but like I think things like I said, I think Sarah Hall is such a bellwether for me of cleanness and beautiful language kind of at the same time. I love, there's an Australian author called Jennifer Down who people really should read, who I think people just often don't read Australian fiction, but she has a short story collection called Pulse Points, which I think is just the clarity and yet the strangeness of the images, sometimes just things that you've not heard before, but they don't seem like they're reaching. Do you know what I mean? There is something I find about, and I don't think there is one way of writing. I think that poetry can be different things. I think writing can be different things. Nothing is wrong. But for me, I never like it when an image or a metaphor takes me further away from understanding of what I'm trying to get closer to. I think that it can be as strange and as artistic as all get out, but it has to bring me closer. And so I think that I'm always kind of looking for writers who can do that and make me feel like that, because I don't know whether you find this, but the second that you publish something, you will end up being sent proofs and new literature all the time, and it's wonderful and such a fortunate place to be, but it also means that you end up with no time to read because you always have 10,000 things to read. And I think it's made me extraordinarily picky about the things that I can actually get through, and I always have to be getting something linguistically from it as well as something plot wise. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, no, I thankfully I think I move around so much people don't know where I am, so but I should have done that. I'm an incredibly slow reader, so it really is a case of having to pick. Okay, I'm gonna read an audience question because otherwise I won't get to them.
Oh my God, it was 18. Oh, it's a lot of praise. Okay, great.
That's fine.
Let me see, is there questions? Great list of female writers. Can't wait. Okay. Oh, great. Okay, it's loads and loads of praise.
That's nice.
So one thing I wanted to, well, maybe just since we've been talking about film, is there anything that you want to recommend from one of your essays or something you've recommended, The Novice, which I sought out and have watched, and it's absolutely fabulous. So
Isn't it so good?
I'm really pleased for that recommendation and to mention it to the crowd. But if there's ones that you want to mention, coupled with the question of have you thought about writing for a visual medium?
So first part of your question, yes, everybody must absolutely watch The Novice, which is this incredible movie which came out, I think it came out this year. I saw it in the cinema this year. It's by a director called Lauren Hadaway, and it's about college rowing, but it has that kind of Black Swan vibe of really kind of psychological breakdown, all coupled with the physical, and I just think it's amazing. And then other things I sort of talked about in that essay, I talked about Portrait of a Lady on Fire, I talked about Water Lilies. I think that in a broader sense, I'm always recommending the same horror movies to people, unfortunately, which is not necessarily water related, but just things that fascinate me. I really love a director called Mike Flanagan, who he made The Haunting of Hill House, which is on Netflix, but he's made an incredible horror movie called Oculus, which not enough people have seen, which sounds really jonky because it's about a magic mirror, but it's actually it's this beautifully balanced horror movie, which is essentially understands the key thing, I think, for me about ghosts in the Gothic, which is that ghosts are always you, and ghosts are always your trauma to some degree, and ghosts are always the past. And he has this wonderful thing where about these two siblings are kind of processing something terrible which happened to them when they were children, but the child versions of themselves are almost always on the same soundstage as the whole movie is shot, and it's incredible. As to the other part of your question, I have thought about it. I think I'd be terrible at it because whilst I absolutely love films and TV, writing for films and TV would take away my main kind of skill, which is images and description, and it would leave me with plot and dialogue, which are not my strongest suits. So I would love to, but I'm not sure I'd be any good at it.
Okay, yeah, the one thing that I can say about my own work is that dialogue is the thing that I feel that I really feel myself at home in. I don't, I'm comfortable in it. So but otherwise plot, yeah, I'm like it's pulling my hair out. But I did I read somewhere that you'd written plays? Because
I did. I mean, yes, they weren't very good. It was a very long time ago. I wrote a couple of plays for my brother, who's an actor, and we sort of did that together, which was really cool. I think I would enjoy it. There is something about humor which I find easier in a sort of playtext setting. But yeah, it's not my most comfortable medium, but I do have to push myself out of it at some point. Somebody in the chat, by the way, says, is it Pulse Points? Yes, there's a short story collection by Jennifer Down called Pulse Points, and she's also written 2 novels, one called Our Magic Hour and one called Bodies of Light. And Bodies of Light just won a massive literary award in Australia. So I really, really urge you to seek those out.
Oh, cool. Thank you. Yeah, and something I didn't mention yet, but except for touching on the Victorian aspect, the settings of because when you're thinking about film and plays, with plays, the first thing that you have to do is enable a space for the dialogue to take place in, and the space of this novel is quite non-specific in the sense that, yes, it's an English novel by the language, the characters are using, maybe by the sense of dysfunctional society in the background. But yeah, and I can imagine that maybe it's intentional to kind of blur the lines between what's plausible and what's kind of real or surreal. But I wonder, yeah, if that's something that you thought about specifically for this book, because I'd have to reread Salt Slow to see whether or not there are more distinctive specific spaces in it. That's not to say that a house or a room or in fact the submarine aren't specifically rendered. It's that the cultural context
No, I think you've really hit on something there, because I really have, I struggle to, or rather not I struggle to, but I quite actively don't like to specifically situate too much, especially when I'm writing genre, because I find it distracting. I think there is one story in Salt Slow, which is the middle one, which is it's a story about a band moving around, and that kind of moves from specific UK cities. But by and large, I want things to exist wherever is plausible. I want them to exist in a place that people recognize without it having to kind of throw you out of it by going, this is London, so I need to figure out every single thing that will be happening in London if this weird thing happened. Because it's not really that important to me. As long as it is feasible as a place and it's not distracting to people, I think that's what's most important.
Yeah, I mean, character, there's always that question of, would this be the same story if it were to take place somewhere else? And the only thing that I can think of is that, well, in plenty of countries, I'm sure the situation with the centre and the bureaucracy and everything would have been different, even if for only for fear of litigation. But I wonder if the characters maybe kind of betray their Britishness in the sense of not being so interested in confrontation to a detriment.
Yeah. No, I think you're right, and the sense of sort of social isolation as well, to some degree. I think the sense of not being au fait with one's neighbours, and the sense of kind of being in this place and the place not being related to you in any way. You just kind of exist in it. I think I felt that quite a lot.
No, that's interesting. And COVID as well. I mean, were you writing any of this during COVID? Obviously, as Submarine, it makes a...
No, I wrote the whole thing between March and December of 2020, which was like prime lockdown period. And I mean, obviously, I think that it would be incredibly... I think that it would be extremely dismissive of people who went through terrible things during COVID to say, like, this is my reaction to COVID, because it wasn't. But I think that it was certainly, when I look back on it now, obviously, and so informed by isolation, obviously so informed by, it's a story about a person being trapped in a submarine and a person being trapped in a flat, essentially. And I can tell now with the thing I'm writing, which is very different, it feels more like a reaction to being out again to some degree. So yeah.
Interesting. But it also has to do with, apart from that kind of entrapment, the sickness, the aspect of sickness as well, is there with COVID.
Yeah, and I think communal grief, and something that we were all feeling to some degree at that point. It was it was hard to not write like that, I'm sure.
Yeah. There's something that I should have formulated a question about, and I haven't, but there is this other, there's so much richness in the novel, but one aspect of it that for some readers will really resound is the question of faith and Catholicism, because it's there in several strands of the novel. One of the characters on the submarine is continually praying, but she also ended up as a marine biologist because she she figured that by the time she became an adult, women would be allowed to be priests, and they weren't, and she wanted to actually get away from a world in which there were churches. And there's a gorgeous parallel there with queer narratives, but anyway, I don't really have a question about this, but except to say, is that something that often comes up in your work? Is it something that you're kind of continually interested in? And
no, I went to a Catholic school. I've been Catholic my whole life, and it's sort of, I no longer am, but you kind of still are, and it informs so much of what I think about, just in terms of, I don't think so much kind of the traditional things that people say about, like, if you're a Catholic you always feel guilt or whatever, but I feel the sense of structure is something which I think so much, and the sense of yourself coming from one very specific place, and how to get away from that, and how to get away from set rules and set morality and things come up a lot when I'm trying to write. And I'm also I'm interested in faith and wresting it back from something inherently negative. I'm interested in faith as something which can be very personal, and something which can be, I don't know, positive and uplifting. And it's and it doesn't always work for the characters who are feeling this. I think for the character you're talking about, she has a terrible time, and Faith doesn't really help, but I think it's because she hasn't rested herself from the structure that she expects so much, and it's to do with how one organizes one's sense of self when the thing you've built your life around is not presented to you as you expect, I think.
Wow, beautifully put. Yeah. There were a couple of questions just in the end there. Someone asked what you're writing now, and it sounds you've said a little bit about some of the associations or vibes of it. Is it long form?
Yes, I'm writing a novel again, which I didn't think I was going to do. I was going to finish a novel and be like, I can go back to short stories now, and unfortunately now I think I had the bug. But I'm writing about, I can't really talk about it too much, but I'm writing about it's sort of, it's still genre inflected. It is about it's about sisters and end times and how you grieve when everything is ending anyway, and I'm doing my best.
Good job. Good job. I mean, that's incredibly quick that you wrote the last book, and that's very intimidating.
Oh God, no.
But yeah, I mean, it's so hard to write another novel after having written one. You just think, how can you squeeze another thing of that size out of your psyche?
I know. I don't know how you did it. So if you can just email me some tips afterwards, that would be.
Well, you see, I had the blessing of not having written short stories ever. I had never read one. I didn't know what they were. Maybe I'd read them, but I didn't recognize them until I'd written 3 novels. And then I started teaching. I didn't study creative writing. So I've discovered the form all of a sudden, and I had finished a novel and I thought, I had some little notion. It was the first story I wrote called Psychobabble, and it's basically these adult siblings in a waiting room. And it was just, I knew that I had this feeling, and I knew it wasn't a novel. And then I discovered the form, and now I'm obsessed. And unfortunately, I'm not a well enough selling novelist to make that move right now.
No, but you're such a beautiful short story writer as well. Like, it's just incredible.
And apart from someone, Marta Carmona has asked, apart from books and film, are there any songs or singers that you take inspiration from? And I think this is probably our last question.
No, that's a great question. It's weird because I don't know if you are the same, but I cannot listen to music and write at all. Like I find it so distracting. I can listen to music without lyrics sometimes, but anything with lyrics, I can't get my rhythm. But my girlfriend describes it as being in a sort of parasitic relationship with Florence and the Machine, because I was insanely lucky that Florence from the band Florence and the Machine blurbed this book, and then I sort of been listening to her new album being like, oh, this is helpful to me too, so I'll just keep doing that. But yeah, and I think I listen to a lot of, I'm not very cool, I listen to a lot of Phoebe Bridgers, I listen to a lot of Taylor Swift. It's not a cool answer, but
music with lyrics by the sounds of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, yeah, I have that problem. I can listen to music without lyrics if I'm writing, but it has to be the same album over and over. So if it's a novel, it's one album for the whole 3 years or however.
Oh my God, no.
Yeah, for Orchid and the Wasp, it was an album called Spaces by a German artist called Nils Fram, and I mean, I still listen to it, and yeah, and I still love it, but I think it helped to create a kind of muscle memory for the text, so that every time you put it on, something, at least I convinced myself that something got released in your brain that said, okay, well, now I'm in this world. Yeah.
You're completely right. I find I don't do, it's not music, but quite often I find, this is really sad, but if I go onto the Joan Didion documentary on Netflix, I listen to that for like 5 minutes, my brain will have righted itself in some way, and then I can go and write. I don't know what it is, but it's very helpful.
I'm trying that. Thanks a lot. Javier, I think, is going to come on. He usually comes on right about now, and encourages everyone to get books. It's so cool that there's book sites that they arrived on time.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you guys. I did have one question for you, Julia. What a great conversation. Chris and I were just marveling at it. I heard somewhere that you like to read and you can read. And I was wondering if you've read anything in the horror genre recently that you loved. And we were big fans. And I was going to actually suggest a book if you haven't read the one I'm going to
Oh,
bring
what
up.
were you going to suggest?
It's from a local writer. It's from FSG. It's a debut novel. It's called This Thing Between Us
Ooh,
by Gus Moreno. And it takes place just south of here in Pilsen. And it's one of the best ghost stories I've ever read. I think all ghost stories are sort of rooted in grief, and it does deal with the main characters basically writing and reading this novel to his partner, who you find out has passed in the first page. And it's a really slow burn about grief, and it's actually very heartwarming and funny. And then it just goes off the rails, like a third of the way through the book. And we're actually hosting him in about 2 weeks for our first book club. He's actually going to be here for it. So we didn't tell anybody he was going to be here. So
that's great.
It'll be a big surprise. But yeah, we really do have a soft spot for that genre. Is there anything that you mentioned Oculus, which I've not seen, but I really want to see?
Oh, you've got it. It's so good. Yep. I think if book wise, it's kind of tangentially horror, but Devil House by John Daniel.
Oh yeah, yes,
just love the man. And it's much less recently, but I often return to, it's much more kind of traditional ghost stories, but the Michelle Paver ghost stories are just absolutely wonderful. They're called Thin Air and Dark Matter, and they are absolutely just beautifully done kind of period ghost stories in a very specific tradition, but also kind of bringing something interesting and something quite queer to them as well. And yeah, just fantastic.
Oh, good to know. Thank you. Thanks. Well, this was amazing. Wish we could do this for another hour or so, but people have things to do. Of course, both of these books here, please order through our website, exileandbookville.com. We ship all over the states, throughout the states. And if you can find them at your local independent, please support all of your local independents, no matter where you are. And thank you, Julia, and of course, Caoilinn. You're amazing, and we are so lucky to be having this reading series with you. You do such a great job, and you come prepared, and you ask great questions, and you bring amazing writers to the show. So thank you so much, and thank you, Julia. And we hopefully someday we'll see both of you guys in Chicago, in the States.
It'll happen.
We can do that.
I've never been. It'll happen.
I have, but I need to go back.
Okay. We'll try and make it at the same time.
Yes, exactly.
That would be crazy amazing. But thank you all so much, and thanks everyone for tuning in today, and everyone have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Talk to you soon, Caoilinn. Bye-bye.